Hi, welcome to Mortality with Me. Today's episode is about a mystery spike in deaths summer 2022, specifically in Connecticut and North Carolina. That's not COVID. And I'm just going to give the game away. There was no spike in deaths in Connecticut and in North Carolina in summer 2022. It just shows up on this dashboard. It is completely bogus because it's modeled. These are projected deaths that did not actually occur, and it's based off of some model assumptions that are faulty. I'm going to show it to you on this dashboard first, what it shows you as a default view. I'm going to show you what part is projected, and then I'm going to demonstrate. I'm going to do a very simplified example to show you how this occurs, and then make a few comments about the situation. Today is August 28th, 2022, and the reason I'm mentioning the date is because I hope whoever is responsible for this is going to come back from vacation. Maybe it'll be after Labor Day. They'll either update the model assumptions and then the spike will go away, or they'll stop projecting the deaths. Well, we'll see. I'll have my comments at the end. Okay, I'm sorry. So this is the dashboard. Excess deaths associated with COVID-19. I haven't done one of these in a long time. I've mainly been using CDC Wonder. CDC Wonder is the database that comes from death certificates. So those are the actual reported deaths. Now that's going to be an undercount because obviously more people die, and then you have to wait for those to get reported and come through death certificates. This excess deaths associated with COVID-19 is also based on death certificates, but you're going to see that it's not an exact count. There's modeling involved. So you'll see as you scroll down when you load this up, there's all this text, and then there's a dashboard, and then I'm just going to keep scrolling. I'll come back to the dashboard, and then there's all this text of technical notes. Most people don't read this stuff. Maybe you should. Okay, especially this stuff about weights. Anyway, let's go back to the default. So the default goes back all the way to January 1st. Each of these columns is the number of deaths for a single week. Okay. And then you have these lines and these pluses and all of that. So yeah, we see the various waves of COVID deaths and excess deaths and blah, blah, blah. And yes, most of these excess deaths that you see in absolute numbers are going to be COVID deaths. And I'm not going to argue about that right now. The default view is for the United States. And you see, okay, so there's some excess deaths for COVID. And if you want to argue about that, you see weekly excess deaths is the default, and we can do with and without COVID. So I'll update the dashboard. So when you change your choice, you have to click update dashboard. So we see a little bitty bit of COVID deaths for the summer. Okay. But let's go back to that weekly excess deaths, update dashboard. And we have this drop down where we can do it by state. So someone noticed for Connecticut, there's all this excess deaths, and I hadn't been hearing anything about that. And when I realized why there were all these excess deaths getting reported for Connecticut, I realized the same problem would appear for North Carolina. And there was a reason I knew it would appear for North Carolina as well, because there was the exact same problem. So it's not because of the population, because North Carolina is actually pretty big in terms of population. Connecticut is pretty small. So you see that there's a spike in deaths for North Carolina as well. Now you may be thinking, oh, well, maybe they had a COVID spike. Well, let's switch this over to COVID. Let's update our dashboard. Okay, North Carolina. No, there's all these non-COVID deaths spiking. And let's go back to Connecticut. Whoa, there's all these non-COVID deaths spiking. What's that all about? Well, I know I kind of gave the game away, and that I said this was totally bogus. you'll see it says weekly excess deaths with and without COVID. There's this third item that most people just skip over because, like, what's this with and without weighting? Well, the weighting, E-I-G-H-T-I-N-G, weighting, is because there is a lag between when somebody dies and when the death certificate is filled out, put into the system, and when the CDC gets it into their system. So, there's a whole process, and I keep mentioning this. I've been mentioning this since 2020, and I knew this even before that because, of course, I worked in life insurance and reinsurance, and I've had to deal with what's called incurred but not reported. I'll get back to that when I do a simplified example. So I'm going to update the dashboard. I'm going to go back to United States, and then I'll go to the specific states. Okay, so for United States, okay, you can barely see it, but there's like these little bitty blue, light blue, that shows the weighting. So that's going to be deaths that they assume occurred, but we don't know about yet. So let's try Connecticut. So do you see the issue? If you look at the dark blue part, those are the deaths that have actually been reported in the system. So we know those have actually occurred. Okay, these people aren't coming back to life. Sorry, guys. So yes, the number of deaths are going to fall off because, of course, there's some lag, and you assume that you're going to have to wait a while. And again, today is the 28th of August. This dashboard usually gets updated on Wednesdays. Let's see if I can get this to pop. Okay, so this probably was updated on the 24th of August, and then when we look here, it's the week ending August 13th. So week ending August 13th. So that's 2 weeks before that. Okay, and so we see, there's a weighting that it's maybe 3 times. Okay, so maybe 3 times what was reported there. Obviously, they've been hitting these with some kind of factor going back, maybe 12 weeks. And before 12 weeks, it doesn't look like they've hit it with a factor. They just assume 100% of deaths have been reported. And that's not necessarily a bad assumption. Not necessarily. But let's pick a state that's close to Connecticut. Let's pick Massachusetts. And let's see what they did with Massachusetts. Notice that Massachusetts doesn't have its, the most recent has a little factor. It doesn't seem like there's much of a difference on the one before that. That's interesting. How about Rhode Island? Rhode Island's a small state in terms of population. So look at Rhode Island. They did amplify the most recent, but they only amplified about 6 weeks worth of reporting, not like Connecticut, where it was about 12 weeks that they've amplified. Okay, that's something to think about. So Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New York is right next door. New York City, let's look at New York City. They barely did anything to New York City. And then New York State, which is New York State minus New York City, only a couple of weeks did it get amplified a little bit in the weighting. Let's look at North Carolina now. North Carolina has a large population. This is not based on population. I'll tell you what it was based on. Okay, so this did not get amplified for 12 weeks, but maybe 8 weeks. So several weeks were amplified. You can see that. Okay, and that really bumped up the total number of deaths that are getting shown on the dashboard as a default. Let's look at South Carolina, which is next door and smaller population. Only about 2 or 3 weeks are getting amplified, and you can barely see anything. Okay, how about Virginia, right next door? A little bigger than North Carolina. No, okay, about the same number of weeks, but the amplification is not as much. How about Tennessee? To the west, barely anything. So what's going on? I am not going to find the specific posts. Well, I might find the post because that's easier to do a search on. It's easier to do a search on specifically North Carolina and Connecticut out of blog posts versus videos. It's hard to do search in videos. I may have mentioned in passing in videos complaints about the processes of both Connecticut and North Carolina, and that their mortality from COVID may have been understated because both of them had slower reporting processes compared to other states. With respect to North Carolina, I absolutely knew the reason why. They were still using a paper-based process, which just thoroughly disgusted me. So yeah, I'll probably be able to find multiple instances of me complaining about that. This year, or by this year, they finally transferred over to a digital process. So now they're actually a lot faster in reporting their death certificates to the CDC. So the statistics are getting into the CDC from North Carolina much faster. They're up to date. And so what's happening is the CDC, for this model and doing this weighting, they're using old assumptions. Same for Connecticut. Connecticut used to be a lot slower. Now, there may be something different going on with Connecticut, and it may be related to them having less resources. Connecticut is a weird situation, and this may be related to pandemic finances and the state doing some cost-cutting stuff and deciding that whoever the person from the State Department of Health who was in charge of sending stuff to the CDC, maybe they had fewer hours they were working, and therefore this wasn't a priority, and therefore things got reported to the CDC more slowly. Okay, so in both cases, the concept is this. In, say, 2021 and 2020, both Connecticut and North Carolina reported their death numbers, their death statistics to the CDC more slowly than they are in 2022. Therefore, the estimates the CDC is making now, they're still assuming that Connecticut and North Carolina are slow, but they're not. So let me work through an example with numbers, and I'll show you how that leads to inflated estimates. Let's assume, okay, we've got a very simplified model. Okay, we have deaths reported, and I'm just going to make it easy. We're doing it as weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. And, there are lags in how the deaths are reported. So we'll assume 5 weeks ago, only 70% of the deaths will have been reported. We'll just pretend 6 weeks ago and before, 100% of the deaths are reported. 4 weeks ago, only 50%. 3 weeks ago, 30%. If we want to get the total deaths, okay, given these percentages, to estimate total, we do the number of deaths that have been reported thus far divided by that percentage, okay? So now we can see, so the easiest one to test would be the 700. If we assume 50% have been reported thus far, then obviously twice that, we're assuming twice that is really how many. The deaths incurred but not reported would be that total number of deaths minus the number that have already been reported, okay? So obviously, the closer we are, there's a smaller percentage of deaths, okay? And we can see, you're going like, oh my gosh, we have this increasing number of deaths, but that's if our assumptions are correct. And suppose that these percentages are based off of a process that was from a year ago when it was slower. I'm going to unhide what the, quote, real percentages were. And so you can see this is a very simplified model. In this simplified model, I just had a level number of deaths each week. and that actually this is a faster process. So instead of 70% that were reported, 90% were reported, 70%, 50%. And by the way, and I'll show you a separate one. Let's suppose our process changed so that we were reporting things much slower than assumed. So instead of 70%, say it was 60%, 40%, and 20%. So I'll just do 10 percentage points less. Then we'd be undercounting. We'd be assuming fewer deaths were occurring than actual. So, this is a sensitivity test to our model assumptions. So, 70 and say 50. Okay, so the problem is if the actual percentage of deaths being reported are much higher than assumed, and they really need to test those model assumptions, what you can get from the model, and this is what I think is coming out of the North Carolina and Connecticut weighted models, is they are creating a spike in deaths for those states by assuming the process is still very slow in those states when it's actually sped up by quite a bit due to process improvements in both of those states. So maybe they need to check their model assumptions. Now, this is something that is common in the actuarial control cycle. And yeah, the actuaries get very, actuaries, but that's because, yes, we have actuarial standards of practice, but we also have lots of people looking over our shoulders. The reason we're doing these incurred but not reported is because we have quarterly financial reporting, and therefore we have regulators looking at our reporting. So you have, say, the quarterly financial report. So if you work for a publicly traded company, you have the GAAP reports that come out every quarter that people are looking at, and it's not just the state insurance regulator. So and there's the STAT, that's statutory quarterly reporting that comes out, and there's an IBNR for those, and often the GAAP and the STAT IBNR may be the same for death benefits, and sometimes they're not. Okay. Why they may differ, I'm not going to get into right now. It's not nefarious. It's just that accounting standards for GAAP and STAT differ. And then there's tax. Yeah, okay. Anyway, the CDC people may not be used to having to deal with changing their models and testing their model assumptions so rapidly. So what should they do? So let me get back to the dashboard. So there are multiple choices that can be made with regards to what to deal with this weighting. Ultimately, they can update the weights in their model so that they'll notice, Connecticut is up to date, and so is North Carolina. They'll just be like all the other states. Things will get up to date and, or review more rapidly, and we're good. Okay, so that's one possible choice. And then these, as more data come in, this little summer spike will just disappear. Ta-da, we won't have to worry about it anymore. That's one potential choice. That will take time for that to go away. And people like me, and then nuts on Twitter, maybe I'm a nut on Twitter, will just keep spinning things about the credibility of the CDC until you get it fixed. So that's one choice. I mean, this may not be a priority. There's a lot of other data problems at the CDC and organizational problems at the CDC. I understand you're undergoing a reorganization. My recommendation, though, is to get rid of this model period. And the reason why is this. It does not only affect that dashboard. The thing I noticed, and this is what really annoyed me, is it affects the cause of death projections. When people notice, there's all these excess deaths and it wasn't COVID, and the reason it wasn't COVID is they have to allocate these weighted deaths to causes of death. And let me put it on to Connecticut. It gets distributed among ages, it gets distributed among races, it gets distributed among causes of death. And so take a look at this malignant neoplasm graph, and it's just skyrocketing. Well, that's because all of these excess deaths have to go somewhere, and cancer is one of the top causes of death, of course. Same for circulatory diseases, which of course is heart disease, Alzheimer's disease. It's old people. If I go into subcause, we'll start seeing it get doled out here. Oh, chronic lower respiratory disease. What we're starting to see is a whole bunch of bogus results from the model because you can't. Why? Because you can't have people deal with reporting lag. Why not just say, oh, by the way, sometimes there's going to be an undercount in death in recent weeks because, of course, it takes time for deaths to get reported, and just deal. Suck it up. If you're not going to keep on top and check that the model results aren't creating these problems, I would just not have model results. What was happening in prior years were the model results in general were forecasting undercounts of deaths, which didn't really bug me that much. I was like, well, there's just a lag in reporting. It doesn't bug me. Once CDC Wonder itself was regularly being updated, I just got my numbers from CDC Wonder because CDC Wonder gave me whatever cause of death data extracts I wanted. The problem with these specific data downloads is it wasn't giving me, I wasn't able to get what I wanted. I preferred getting the user unfriendly, and it's not that unfriendly, extracts that were useful to me. And this weighting, I had to keep filtering out the weighted. You can get the unweighted data. That's not the problem. I mean, all of the data, when you download this data, they have the weighted and the unweighted numbers in there. So I could get this unweighted numbers, and you can see there's a reporting lag. I created my own forecasts. So, I had no problem with creating my own forecast. But if I look at what's actually the unweighted data, I don't really see any excess mortality for Connecticut. If I go to North Carolina, where are you, North Carolina? There you are. I don't really see a lot of excess hanging out there. Let me do COVID there for North Carolina. Okay, so there's a little bit of COVID there, and some of that can come from weighting, and the problem is I don't know how much of that is real and how much of that is imputed from their model. This is annoying. I'm going to get it straight from CDC Wonder and not this modeled result because this is a pain in the butt. It's not allowing me to do it through this dashboard. So, every time they try to make one of these dashboards user friendly, they have to put all of this crap, all of this jargon around it and say, well, they should have read the fine print. Well, no, people aren't reading the fine print. And then you have these models that have, what's this crap? I think I know what that crap is, but, I don't like it. Either make it work right, okay? This is ridiculous. Look at this. Just don't model the deaths. Just let people deal with the fact that it takes time to report deaths. I think it'll be a lot simpler if you don't have the weighted deaths, and then you can get rid of this excess deaths with and without weighting. And then you can simplify everything. And you can get rid of a lot of this excess text, and you don't have to explain. I think time has gone on long enough. It's no longer 2020. It's now 2022, and people can deal with having to wait 4 to 8 weeks to have complete death data. Okay? So, no, there was no spike in deaths in summer 2022 in Connecticut and North Carolina. What there was a not timely updating of model assumptions from the CDC. And I hope they update those model assumptions. But again, maybe it's not a priority, and maybe this thing will hang around for several more weeks until it finally gets fixed. Who knows? I sent them an email or, and I tweeted at them a few times. I'm easy to find, and now I'm on YouTube. So, hey, CDC, DM me or something. I'm around. Bye.